But this conversation is about that larger vision. You know, if you had talked 5 or 10 years ago about what it was that was required of finance for a sustainable planet, people would have said, we've got to stop finance doing bad stuff. And that's right. Stop investing in coal. Be careful about what you're investing in. But actually, what we're hearing now is an understanding that if we're going to move to the transition that allows us to deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals and do that at the same time as we're delivering on the Paris COP21, as we're delivering on 2 degrees, there are many trillions of dollars that are required, and that those trillions of dollars need to come from the finance industry. What we need is not just to desist. What we need is to have finance involved in impact. And so we're going to have a discussion. Started with Rachel Kyte. She leads the initiative, the Sustainable Energy for All. What an absolutely fantastic goal. And then a response by 3 leading financiers. As I say, the discussion will be led by Eric Usher, our director. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much, Eric and David. As both have already started to frame out, you know, yesterday we had this scene setting, which looked at, first of all, steps being taken here in the region, engagement of both the public and private sectors, including zooming in on the role of and the potential of Islamic finance. And then through the day, some deep dives and ending up with this perspective on enabling policies and regulations and how things are starting to move, but we have a long way to go. As we've heard, this session really is to focus on how can we start to get more of a business solutions perspective on sustainable development and what it means in terms of sustainable finance. You know, we're talking about this transition. Issues like divestment are obviously very important from topics like coal, decarbonization, but the question is where's the capital going to go? And do we have the conditions and do we have the innovations to put the capital into the places we need from a societal perspective, but also increasingly from a business perspective? As we heard from Bertrand Piccard, he flew around the world and he said from the perspective of bankers, it's not about risks, it's about making money. So we're going to lead off, as David has already introduced, Rachel Kyte, who is the CEO of Sustainable Energy for All. So she has lead responsibilities. She's special representative to Secretary General for Sustainable Energy, so Goal 9 within the Sustainable Development Goals. She also comes from the World Bank Group, where she was vice president, and also lead on the issue of climate. So in her role, really the titular lead of bringing together the finance community to the result that we had in Paris, so understanding the aspects of the relationship between public and private from a financier's perspective. So Rachel, could I ask you to come up and challenge us?
Hello, everybody. So Eric, it's goal 7. I think 9 is industrialization. Anyway, they're all linked. They're all linked. Anyway, I won't tell the SG that you got it wrong. No. So I'm delighted to be here, and I'm really sorry that I wasn't here yesterday. Lots of good friends spoke yesterday, so I run the risk of repeating a few truths. But actually, I was in Singapore the last couple of days at the International Energy Week, which is a massive gathering of the energy world, very much focused on Asia, which is, of course, the growing part of the world. And it's in those meetings where we have to take in everything that we agreed last year and make sense of it in very real terms. So we're at a very particular moment in history where we have agreed the point on the horizon to which we are traveling. We don't need to spend any more time debating whether it's here or there. It's there. We agreed. We agreed through the development goals and through the Paris Agreement, which comes into force in about 10 days' time, that that's where we're going. The result is that we are on a process of deep decarbonisation, a process that we've never journeyed on as an international community. We are on a process of deep decarbonisation and building an economy that is inclusive and serves everybody's basic needs, which it doesn't today and which it has never done. A challenge that we have never ventured on as an international community before. And we're on this journey at a time when the financial sector is not hooked up as an engine to drive us in that direction. The decoupling of the financial sector from the economic priorities that we have to set for ourselves is quite astounding, and yet an enormous moment for creative destruction. So when I stand here in a UNEP FI meeting, looking back over your proud history of niggling away at the development community that didn't understand that it's going to be the private sector that will provide the innovation, that business does business better than anybody else and it should be left to do the business of business, but that business should understand what the binding constraints are and that business should understand what the opportunity is. And when a UNEP FI has been niggling away at the financial sector, to the boardrooms above and to the friends and colleagues in the other C-suites to try to get their head around what is really going on here, I congratulate you for the proud history that's brought you to this moment. And what I say to you is, this is very important. You are very important. You have to continue to look around the corners, but the brands that you work for are not bold, and they must be bold. And I'm going to talk about what bold means in this particular world. But I think that as Paris comes into force, as we begin to understand that we are on our way through an economic transition, the likes of which we've never seen before, we have to understand what's going to drive that transition. Obviously, I work now on the issues of sustainable energy in particular, and of course the energy transition has to be at the forefront of that economic transition, because first of all, energy is a large part of what we need to get right, but it's interlinkage with managing land systems so that we get to a well below 2 degree scenario. And the relationship between energy and land is important. And of course, it's all very well to have a clean energy system, but if the transport systems and the industry that feed off that are not clean, then we've got a problem. And when I think about this energy transition, then we're talking about a revolution in energy productivity. I mean, since the early 1970s, Amory Lovins and all kinds of other people have said, look, this is the truth right in front of us. We can be, and we must be more energy productive. And yet, this is still not systemic. It's still not optimized in any economy in the world. Some are doing better than others, but no one optimizes for energy productivity. So a revolution in energy productivity, an energy system that serves everybody's needs. We still have 1.1 billion people without access to electricity. We have 2.9 billion people, mainly women, who can't cook a meal for their kids or themselves without running the risk of poisoning and damaging their lungs. It's 2016, and that's okay. Is it? So an energy system that is much more productive, that meets everybody's needs, and in order to do that, we'll have to have a completely different mix of energy sources. And you saw yesterday with the IEA's latest figures that renewable energy now is attracting more investment than fossil fuels. And we can see points of light on the horizon. The transition has started. The question is speed and scale, which of course demands a financial sector that is harnessed to the economic challenge that we've laid down for ourselves. Building off what Eric said, I'd like to imagine that 2015 was not just a leadership blip. We didn't just get lucky last year. We have constant political leadership challenges ahead of us. Transfer of power, hopefully peaceful, on November the 8th and January the 20th in the United States. You know, a little bit of inward-looking crisis in Europe. We need good leaders everywhere. And we need that leadership. But The Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol, to which Eric referred, is an extraordinary act of leadership. And as the financial sector, that has to be understood by you and translated by you to the boards and the C-suites around you as a massive opportunity. The opportunity to be the banker of choice for the manufacturer of the supercooling devices that must now be competitive in a post-Kigali Amendment world. The opportunity for you to be the banker of the companies that will imagine, design, build, and export the super efficient motor, the super efficient water pump, the super efficient cook stove, the super efficient light, the super efficient device that you need in order to meet not only your needs but your aspirations in a world of growing middle class, growing low middle class, and growing poor who want and need many things that they don't have today. This is an extraordinary opportunity, yet is that the conversation that's going on amongst your colleagues? So the job is to translate the leadership at the political level through the agreements into the opportunity for the financial sector to really start building scale. I think there are three challenges. I mean, I could go on for many more, but I think there are three that this room in particular needs to take on. What would it take for the financial sector to be more of a part of the solution for scale? The first is, how are we going to deal with transparency? It's coming. It's barreling down at you. And the question is, are you going to move voluntarily, or are you going to make nice noises and wait for it to come mandatorily? Because there's no question that it is coming. My history of working in this sector and with you is that you much prefer to be the masters of your own universe. You must much prefer to do something voluntarily, learn as you do, perfect, and then engage. So when I look at the kinds of shareholder resolutions that are being prepared for next year, for the companies that are deeply carbon intensive and the companies that are part of deeply carbon intensive supply chains, then I think that the conversation is not so much about whether or not there is a carbon bubble. I mean, we can have that conversation. But the conversation really is about respect for shareholders, respect for the sector, and about competitiveness. And as bankers, I think you should be able and willing to embrace transparency and able and willing to push your portfolio companies in that direction. Because I think it's only when we begin to see how we are really exposed to the risk of not managing this economic transition smoothly that we can start to have real conversations. And it's only when we understand that we will see the size of the opportunity. So I think that whether it's the Bloomberg Commission or whether it's work at the FSB that filters down through regulators, or whether it comes up through legislators, or whether it's going to come through the way that asset owners are instructed, the need for more and more transparency is going to come. And if I were in your shoes, I would want to be one step ahead of that. Nick Robbins, I think, is in the room. He wrote a really good piece recently about the need for green tagging, understanding what's green or what's sustainable in the portfolio, understanding what's not. From that comes the information needed for innovation of products and services, something that traditionally you do very well. How can you innovate for the kinds of opportunities at scale if you don't have the information you really need to be able to understand where you are? The second is, building off that, we need to understand risk better, but much more we need to understand the size of the opportunity. I already talked about the IEA numbers, renewables now bigger than coal and oil. Interesting time for the gas industry. Super efficiency. Energy productivity is the cheapest, easiest, quickest way to get on the trajectory you need to be on in order to be at a way below 2-degree world. If something is cheaper, easier, and faster, don't you want the company that can exploit that best for itself and in its supply chain in your portfolio? If we look at EP100 and RE100, the initiatives of companies to For RE100, commit to only purchasing renewable energy, and for EP100 to double the rate of energy productivity for their business and their supply chain. When companies sign up, it does two things. One, it sends a very, very powerful signal to the sector, to their supply chain and everybody that's involved in it, as well as to employees. But secondly, it sends a profound signal into the financial sector that here we have a long-term corporate off-taker in the case of renewable energy. That must allow you to bring in new investors and new ideas about how the world is spinning and turning. So I hear you say, yes, 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 but performance is not rewarded. I mean, if we look for the best-in-class energy productive cement firm or manufacturing company, then yeah, it all sounds very good, but I don't get rewarded for it. Which brings me to my third point. The clarion call that has to come not just from this room, but from your bosses and from your boards. The financial sector is powerful, and its powerful voice is used in debate about regulation every day of the week. And frankly, the voice is not strong enough in the call for the rules that have to be set for you to be the engine that will drive this revolution forward. It is post-2015, ladies and gentlemen. It's not okay. It's not okay to be putting out a green bond and then adding into the portfolio carbon intensity day after day after day. And sooner or later, the public, through transparency, or the regulator, through stress, or politicians, through sudden insight, are going to come down and set rules. Call now for the rules that will allow you to grow, will allow you to turn a business that will reward your own shareholders, and will allow you to be part of a positive conversation about how we re-harness the financial sector to the economic transition we're about to go through. The days of lobbying for one thing and doing another are soon to be over. I think there is a general lack of empathy with inconsistency across society. In Paris, in the run-up to Paris, the French government would, at a total government level, right? I mean, there wasn't a government minister that wasn't involved towards the end, would go around the world and ask for us to mettre en cohérence our policies, our thoughts, our positions, our negotiating positions, to put in coherence the way in which we think about the economic transition that we have now agreed to is something that the financial sector will be essential in. And it is time to step up, and it is time to push that forward. So the question is not whether or not we need to deeply decarbonize. The question is not whether or not we have started on that journey. The question is not whether renewables are cheaper than coal. The question is, how will we build on what is already happening and take it to scale and give ourselves a chance to meet the needs of everybody and exploit and open up the markets for that growing number of people who need to have their needs met? And how will we open up an economic transition that can give us all a chance of the new innovations, the new products, the new ways of living, the new ways of designing cities, the new ways of thinking about where our food comes from? All of this will have to happen. All of this is happening, but it's not yet moving at the scale that we need. There has not been any transition in modern world history where the financial sector has not driven the change at speed. At the moment, UNEP FI is there, but what does it take for UNEP FI to bring the unpersuaded along with you? And that, I think, is that should be your request to the United Nations system. That should be your request to the multilateral development banks. It should be your request to the Bloomberg Commission. It should be your request to everybody. Here is a force, a fighting force that can see around the corner, that sees the future, that can be put to work. You need help. We need you. There is much to be done in partnership. But we have to understand that the financial sector will have to be connected up into this economic transition in a way that it just isn't at the moment. The pressure points will come from all around, and I would want to be a first mover in a situation of some uncertainty and a situation of certain volatility. But we need you. We rely upon you. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk to you. Thank you. Okay? Is that it?
Rachel, and so I think from Eric through Rachel, essentially we're getting this framing and this challenge to say, we have this new global agenda, governments, intergovernmental agreements, but it's about setting societal roadmaps of where we need to go in terms of sustainable development broadly. What does this mean for our members and for the finance community more generally? Is this an opportunity? How do we make business out of sustainable development? So with that, for some time, we've been developing within the Finance Initiative a number of members who are engaged in trying to lead forward and trying to make sense of this opportunity. We've developed something called Positive Impact. There's been a set of principles that are being developed about how do you define it, how do you start to get the frameworks, how do you start to do your beneficiaries, show them the type of impacts we're aiming for in an integrated sense, are not only financial, but there's a bigger remit. And in the end, it's good business. With that, I'd like to call up the three panelists for today's session, and also if Eric, you could join as well. So on the panel, we have representatives of three members of the Finance Initiative. We have João Consiglio. João is Vice President, an Executive Officer, and member of the Board of Executive Officers of Banco Santander, Brazil. We have Gerald Walker, who's Chief Executive Officer of Wholesale Banking for UK, Ireland, and the Middle East for ING Bank. And we have Saker Nusbai, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Hermes Investment Management, based in the UK. Saker, please welcome. So what I'd like to start to do is to give to the three panelists a few minutes to give their framing thinking about what do you make of this business opportunity, and as an institution, what are you doing today to try to make business out of it? Could I start with you, João?
Well, tough task, well, just after Eric and Rachel. And well, thanks a lot for everybody. Just setting the context, I'm responsible for a portfolio of more than 5,000 groups of companies. It's more or less 20,000 entities that we are dealing on the day by day. And well, having said that, well, I think going to the simple, to the basics is pretty important. What is the existence of a bank? Every time that I'm working and I wake up and go to work, I'm thinking on what we do. And actually, the existence of a bank is, well, we are there to enable transactions, well, payments and receivables. We are there to receive and take care of the money of the people that are saving for their future. Mm-hmm. Actually, we are taking care of the dreams and the plans of the people for their next future. And actually, well, we are choosing the best initiatives and projects of the society. And we are choosing that projects and using the money of the depositors to support that project. And every time, well, I know that I have a lot of bankers that are discussing the projects, are discussing the way that we are doing our business, and many times I'm pretty energized that I know that at this point of time we have people that are aware that they are planting, well, the next future with this job on the day by day. Having said that, well, we are now financing our own future. We are deciding where the place where we and the clients will live in the next future with the money that they are saving to live in the next future. And well, what we are doing on that, well, more or less 10 or 12 years ago, we started to ask our clients to respond some social environmental questionnaires, and we started to analyze them. And every time that, well, we were not satisfied with the questionnaires, we discussed, well, what they are doing to mitigate and if we want or not work with those companies. But, well, actually, this, we developed a huge capacity to analyze these questionnaires, to discuss it, and to analyze, well, the answers of the clients and to audit what they are responding. And this was pretty nice, but it was considered by the bankers kind of, well, something required by the risk department or by someone that was freaking on the environmental issues or the social issues. And actually, well, we analyzed more than 20,000 questionnaires, well, every 2 or 3 years, because we are analyzing more than once every time that we have some questions there. And well, using that data, we identified that well, every time that we have a company that take care of the social environmental issues, we had companies that usually succeed. Usually they have better management skills. They are usually more efficient and more responsible in their investment analysis and have better skilled people and more committed with the future. Well, usually they have better results. Less risk for the bank, better results for the bank. And actually, we were not including this in our day by day. Then we decided to include or to create a rating and include this rating in our credit ratings. And actually, what is happening is, well, the social environmental aspects of the companies are influencing, well, the credit risk of the companies and also, well, our risk appetite and the prices that we are allowed to work with these clients. And well, but more than this, what happened also is immediately we create a culture that was, well, the bankers started to discuss with the clients how to have a better credit rating because they want to deal with those clients. And usually the socio-environmental aspects was a key discussion with these clients because it was not a treated aspect for the clients. Usually they discussed the audit, the financial aspects, and other things that we usually had in our analysis. And suddenly we did not have to convince people because it was convenient to them to understand what are the aspects that we were considering in our credit ratings and how to work with these clients. Well, actually, this defining the ratings and using this did not, well, we do not are so arrogant in saying that we are safe from disasters, accidents, or other things, because the tail risk we cannot avoid there. But the day by day will produce a better portfolio to our bank. And some people asked me, well, if I'm concerned in losing clients. Well, why you are doing this if you have a worse price or worse credit rating for that specific company, we will have a less appetite for working with them. And I'm saying that, well, actually, maybe we are losing some clients, but we are acquiring others, especially the depositors that are thinking that we are very prudent with their money. We are producing with their money the future that they want to live. And well, I think in the long term it will pay off but in the short term is already producing very good results. Usually people ask me if this is pretty complicated to people to understand. And actually it's not complicated. When bankers ask me what they have if they have a dilemma to decide what they have to do. And usually I use phrases that I learned with my father, that is, every time that you have a dilemma, you have to decide by something that you can tell to your children at dinner. And if you have, if you are comfortable to tell everything that you are doing during the day at the dinner to your children, then you are right. And actually, in these days, I'm having very good conversation with my children.
Great, thank you very much, João. So this is quite an intriguing, concept, the idea that those who manage environmental social risks more effectively are actually, you're finding, a lower credit risk and therefore can get access to lower cost financing. What does this mean? How does the idea that if you're a good steward on environmental social issues, you can lower your cost of financing, how has that been a tool to actually motivate your customers to actually improve their performance on these issues? Is this seen as now starting to be material to them?
Well, actually, the discussion of having this as part of the analysis is improving the way that clients are dealing with the problems. Well, the life is fixing problems, and it's not about lower price to people that do not deserve it, but to the people that are more efficient and doing the right
okay.
thing.
So this is about creating business. Now, Santander is, I think you have about 160,000 employees. Is that about right?
Sorry?
You have about 160,000 employees as a global...
Yeah, we have 60,000 employees in Brazil.
So what does this mean across the organization in terms of there's business opportunity here, but is that something that actually spreads and sells internally, or are there significant challenges?
Well, actually, for the people that are working with large companies, this is part of the day by day. For the whole organization, I think we are going in the way of spreading this concept to everybody. And we have some other programs for retail and so on, but it's not so deep and part of the day by day as it is already in the corporate portfolio.
Okay, thank you very much, Joe. So what we're going to do is now move to the perspective of a leading Dutch bank, ING. Gerald, can you talk a little bit about how your institution, who has traditionally been quite a leader on environmental social issues, but how are you seeing the opportunities to turn this into good business?
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Look, ING is about 50,000 people globally. It operates across 40 markets and has a market cap of about 45 billion. So it has the ability to have impact as an organization. And when one looks at ING's leadership or views on sustainability, one's got to take a step backwards to remember that ING is an organization which is centered in the Netherlands. And there's a whole generation in the Netherlands who remember very clearly the waters rising and causing multiple hundreds of deaths in 1950s in Holland. And therefore, the real impact of the global warming at that time. So it's actually an authentic concern in the low countries of this world that if we don't get this right, their country actually disappears. 25% of the country is under the sea level. So that drives understanding it, necessity being a driver to all sorts of invention. And ING's first sustainability report was put out over 20 years ago now. And as part of our journey, we started with the normal activity of corporate social responsibility broadly through our retail organization. We then moved on to the second pillar, which is, of course, our own internal footprint. Financial organizations don't have tremendously big carbon footprints, but nonetheless, we neutralized that in all aspects which we could, including taking all of our power from renewable sources. And then we started moving along what is probably the more interesting course and touches into what Rachel was looking at, which is that we started through our ESR policies deciding on what we would not do as an organization. And I think it's not just about positive impact, it's about positive choices for better. The first manifestation of that through ESR was probably the Equator Principles in 2003 when we were one of the founder signatories. And we started as an organization choosing not to do things, which anybody who's had any involvement in banks knows that's a bloody difficult thing to do if you actually think it's a good piece of business if it were not for X, Y, or Z. But we did it, and we moved forward through the Equator Principles to think even deeper as an organization about how do we as a firm run sustainability across all of our lending globally. And that was driven by the view that we do believe we can be a force for good within the finance sector. We moved it mainstream, and I think that's the important point I think that Joe was talking about is how do you move your portfolio which has been undiversified in its thought process between sustainability and non-sustainability. And the way we started to do that was by putting all of our transactions through certain lenses. Driven through our ESR policy, we started tagging all of our clients as either sustainable clients or non-sustainable client. Now, non-sustainable does not necessarily mean bad on exit, but we were looking for the relative sustainability across all of our portfolio. And transaction by transaction, we were looking at the sustainability of the individual transaction. And I think this is slightly different to Joe's approach to it, Eric, because he's done it through almost giving a risk benefit to it in his model. We've taken it that we wanted to know within our portfolio the shape of it over time. Because we felt that shape was probably a good way of communicating within the organization, and we measured it. And for any of us who run big organizations, what you measure actually gets done generally in firms. If you don't measure it, it seems to be a nice to have. And over the last few years, our measurement capability has got better. We're now within our global portfolio at a figure of around 29 billion transactions, which we would classify as being sustainable transitions, the financing of sustainable transitions. And that's companies or projects which are bringing us in the right direction towards the UN goals. Now, putting that into perspective, that 17% is around 29 billion of our global portfolio. And we have set targets that by 2020 we'll bring that up to somewhere around the 35 billion level. And based on the growth rate that I see within our business and the momentum that picks up on this, I'm pretty sure that we will get there. And within all of that, there's a very wide church of sustainable transactions. It's everything from the renewable energy through to wastewater, through to the companies who are just doing things better in terms of greenhouse gas reduction or the like. We've then, as our thought process has developed, we then, of course, and this is, I think, where the investment market comes in, we took ourselves to the green bond market last year. And again, not because we wanted to put a flag out there and tick a box about issuing a green bond. We wanted to be out there showing that it was possible for a bank to do this across multiple sectors. And we put 6 subsectors of our business into that green bond: renewable energy, public transportation, green buildings, wastewater, waste management, energy efficiency. We created sub-pools within that, and we issued a bond which we raised just over 1.3 billion, and it was more than 2.5 times oversubscribed as we went through. Now that was a manifestation to the market as well, that it is possible to run a bank slightly differently to maybe mainstream. It also allowed us, and I think this is an important thing for us as we move forward, to have the knowledge in-house and know by doing what other banks can do, and we can help them and we can help our clients issue green bonds as well, which we do. We also take it a layer further, and within some of our lending portfolio we're putting green clausing in, so that we're actually very specifically putting in what the purpose is for those transactions. And so in listening to what Rachel said about green tagging, we're doing quite a lot of that. I think we do understand the risk profiles of this. I suspect the unity of the banking system is probably not strong. Well, no, it's definitely not strong enough on this yet. But internally, we keep on pushing forward on this, and our next level of interaction with the market is on the whole world of circular finance. I think we all know that if we consume on this planet at the rate that we are currently doing, we'll run out of this wonderful planet fairly rapidly, certainly within a few generations. So a great deal of thought has been going on within our company about how do we interact with companies to look at the use of assets in a different way. How do we finance from the actual acquisition of assets to the access of assets? And that view of from asset to access is starting to drive some of our thought process with certain clients. And if I can give you that, it's probably a more nebulous structure theme in itself. But we work with, for instance, Philips in Holland, and we have financed a transaction with them in Schiphol Airport, the major airport there, where in fact Philips is now supplying lighting. It's no longer supplying light bulbs, it supplies lighting. And it maintains its ownership of the actual physical item through the whole life cycle, from the moment it's put in, through all of the maintenance, repair, recycling, and then the most important thing for Schiphol, for the airport, is that the lights stay on. And thinking through all of the ramifications for Philips, it allows them to design correctly their bulbs for longevity, because they get a price for it, whether or not the light bulb lasts 1 month or 6 months. So let's try and make a bulb that lasts 6 months or a year. So in the circular economy, we're starting to do quite a lot there. Now, with all of that, it won't be surprising that when UNIP is looking at the Positive Impact Manifesto, ING is fairly involved in trying to drive through the thought process that takes us to the principles that are now there, Eric, as you know, which we would hope goes some way towards what Rachel's clarion call was about, let's see if the industry can solve this itself, a bit like the Equator Principles were for project finance. If we can get the principles of the Positive Impact Manifesto more broadly accepted across the market, you start driving the market as a power for good rather than just individual companies. And so I suppose the message from ING as an organization is we have been able to incorporate this centrally within our business model. We do it as a firm really very authentically. as I say, partly due to the history of Holland itself. We do believe fundamentally it adds value to our business. Without being trite, we do think that good business is good business. And it's actually creating a sustainable dialogue within our firm, which is embraced within people who work for it, but also makes ING an attractive place for people to come to work. Because there's generations out there that now care about this in a way that, frankly, maybe a generation 30 years ago wasn't. So we see it as important for the future of our business.
Great. Okay, thank you very much, Darren. It's interesting, yesterday we talked about Islamic finance and some of the principles of like ESCO, a performance contract, and what you're doing with Philips. The idea is that you share the benefits, you work together towards longer term outcomes. There are actually interesting tenets of that within the idea of Sharia finance that I think we can learn a lot from. So I'm going to go to Saker. Saker, you lead Hermes Investment Management, one of the certainly leaders in terms of how you've integrated these types of concepts across an organization. And you've also talked about talking about the need for responsible capitalism. Could you tell us a little bit more about how you see that and how you've actually been able to put that in place through the activities of Hermes?
Sure. So let me put my own framing, just for Eric and for Rachel, to sort of put it in the context of everybody here. The amount of money we need for sustainable development goals is $7.5 trillion, I was told yesterday. The amount of the size of the capital markets, according to the OECD, is 150 trillion, excluding the investment pool. These are created by banks and insurance companies. The size of the savings pool in the world is 50 trillion. That 50 trillion ultimately controls 150. So you can look at this three ways. You can say that we only need 3.5% of the size of the capital markets. You can say we only need 15% of the size of the savings pool. And who owns these savings pools? These savings pools are owned by ordinary citizens. I have news for everybody here. Mr. Gates is not the wealthiest man in the world, if that was still his ranking. It's actually my employers. Who are my employers? The working men and working women of British Telecom, which is a company in a reasonably small nation, 60 million in Europe. The power of these saving pools is what should be utilized to try to bring the agenda of FI, or United Nations Environment Finance, forward. That's what should be done. Now, how have we done it at Hermes, and what are we trying to do? Hermes works on the principle that we're not there to make returns. We're there to help people retire better. We choose that. That's our mission, to help people retire better. Better is an amorphous word that includes living well, but also includes an environmental aspect. And part of it is this word responsibility, the idea that you've got to be responsible for the actions that you take. We started on this journey some 30 years ago, but sitting in this room is Mr. Pitt Watson. Mr. Pitt Watson was the leader in starting this amazing concept of stewardship. That if you own a company, if you own a Santander, if you own a bank like an ING, it's not enough simply to own the bank. It's actually more important that you engage with them, that you talk to them, that you help shape what their actions are. Because that 50 trillion affects the 150. And combined, the 200 shape the society that we live in today, shape the society we will live in the future, and the world that we will bequeath to our children. That gave us, funnily enough, in the traditional business of asset management, an advantage. We integrate ESG. I'm not saying this here to show off about Hermes. I mean, I'm the least important person in the firm. Other people do far more important work in it. But numbers talk for themselves. We are among the best performing on a traditional matrix of all asset managers anywhere in the world. And I say to people, it's a very simple decision you've got to make. Either you believe that we happen to be a collection of superior DNA. I mean, look at me. Do I look like a representative of a collection of superior DNA? No.
Yes, go on.
No. Or you believe we're doing something different. And what we're doing different are three things. The first is we engage with companies. We talk to them. We were having a discussion before we go, how do you talk to a company which is in a bad business, like an oil business, if you don't want it to be there? Well, you talk to it, you try to say it's got to change its business. That's what you say to a Halliburton. You own it, but you try to say to it, change your business model. But come on, oil companies are always companies. Really? DSM, a leader in some ways in environmentally forward-looking business, started its life as a coal company. And it changed from being a coal company to being a chemical company. It then didn't like the plastics it was in. And it changes business from bad plastics to actually additives for food. I mean, it's an amazing transformation. Companies can change. But there is a responsibility, as David said all these years ago, on the owners of the companies to engage with them. That's our first advantage. The second advantage is we understand that ESG is how you do long-term investment. I mean, sorry, I don't understand the question. What is the point of investing in a business which is not going to be here in the long term? Isn't that sustainability? What is the point of investing in a business that actually causes ruction? It loses its social license. So sustainability is normal. Governance, we can prove to you that governance and transparency actually improve performance, as you saw in Santander. So we integrate ESG into everything we do, and I think that's the second reason why our results are better. And the third one is we are long-term. If you want to basically get returns over 1 year or 2 years, that's fine. I mean, go to Las Vegas. It's a great place to do that, right? You'll have fun, it's nice, and so on. I don't gamble, I'm a Muslim, but you know, you can have fun. But if you actually want to invest, then you've got to get out of the system, and we're all guilty of it, the whole financial system. I have nothing but the deepest respect for the financial journalists who work on it. But when you listen to the TV stations, I'm not going to mention their names, they're well-known names, they all have the same thing. Listen to them. They say the markets are going to open up, and the markets are going to open up. Markets are going to open up 0.5%. This is not the races. It doesn't make a difference. Markets work on cycles of 10 and 20 years. So because we're long-term, because we engage, and because we integrate ESG, we perform better. Now, what's happened, which is what I'll end up with, is a change in society. 30 years ago, when we started this, we were unique. Unique. The only people doing it. 10 years ago, when David Pitt Watson started the engagement service, we were thought of as mildly eccentric, but at the edge. Now, because the societal, this is the citizens thing that Eric was talking about, because citizens are moving, actually the whole businesses are moving. So you have BlackRock, the largest provider of passive management, but one of the largest asset managers in the world. BlackRock now trying to build a team that emulates the team that David built 10 years ago at Hermes, and it's going to be 4 times the size. And it will engage with many more companies, and he'll have it done in no time. Now, why is he doing this? Of course, he could have had a conversion on the road to Damascus, or he could have seen it's good business. I don't care which one it is, the fact is it's happening. ESG, where we once used to say we're the only people who integrate ESG, everybody now says they integrate ESG. It's fantastic. I mean, whether they do or they don't, it doesn't matter, but they're saying it. And there is societal pressure to be long-term. So where we have been, if you like, out there at the edge of it, leading the charge, our purpose now is to show that it can be a good business in the traditional sense. Because there are some people that still separate between what their heart tells them to do and between what their wallet tells them they should do. And we're trying to prove to them that actually there is no difference. It's one and the same. And I take great pleasure in seeing that our commercial advantage in being different is being eroded. I say to people, my job as a CEO is to see myself and my company completely arbitraged out of business. Because if we're arbitraged out of business, it means everybody's doing stewardship. If we're arbitraged out of business, then everybody is doing ESG. If we're arbitraged out of business, then everybody is doing long-term. And then companies that own the shares in the banks will hold the banks to account and say, why are you making so much money? Why aren't you being transparent? How are you treating your workforce? Are you being fully equal in the way that you treat different genders in your workforce, for example? What's your attitude towards slavery? But all these wonderful things. And we then have a meaningful impact on society. So we are part of the Impact Initiative because we think all investment is impactful. And we think the financial markets has a duty, not a job, not an option, a duty to make this a better world for us to live in, because that should be its function. But we also think it's good business. And hopefully we will be arbitraged out of business, and then I'll go and ask David for a job helping him in conferences, right?
Sakar, could I a lead-on question from that? It's good business for Hermes to be out in front on this issue. We're not going to get change unless the entire industry changes. How do you see the comparative positioning? Are you hoping that a BlackRock is going to come along, or how does that, in terms of your competitive positioning, mean you always want to be up in front? So if they're actually a little bit slow, that's good for your business because you can be a leader. How do you see those dynamics?
So ultimately, I don't want to be a leader. I mean, ultimately, genuinely, I want to be arbitrage. By the way, why? It's simple. My shareholders are 320,000 ordinary working men and women who work for BT. If the world is a better place, and if we don't have heating of the environment, if we stop heating at 1.5 degrees, we've done our job for them. But leave that aside. The world is changing because of two things. One is there's a business imperative pushing it. So Mr. Fink's expanding his stewardship business, that's basically a business imperative pushing it. There is some argument that there is a bottom-up demand from citizens asking for it. So for example, although we do everything as ESG, we have one product which is marked ESG, and that's because young savers in Australia said, look, it's not good enough. We want it to be called that, so that's what we want saving. That's a bit like you have with your clients at Santander, so that's bottom up. And part of it is regulatory. In the Netherlands, bankers take an oath to be ethical. You'd be surprised that in asset management, the people who look after the assets of the world, there is absolutely no imperative on them whatsoever under law anywhere to actually look after the people whose money it is. Extraordinary. We're the only house in the world that does it, and we've done it voluntarily. However, Eric mentioned Mr. Obama. Mr. Obama has just about to pass a law in the United States that's going to force the people who run assets to put the interests of their clients before the business. So three things are happening. There's a move from the bottom, which is to say that the buyers, the actual savers, want change. There is a business advantage that's perceived by the businessmen. So the C-suite is moving because it's good business and it makes them money. And there's some political leadership, if you like, pushing from above because they see that the ruction that you have in society because of the dysfunctionality of the system is producing 50 million voters for Mr. Trump, is producing 17 million voters for Brexit, is producing these ructions which are not good for society at large.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. We're going to just open up for a couple questions, and we try to, in terms of rounding out the discussion. If you'd please put up your hand, we have some mics to move around. We have one at the back there, in the center. I think it's Mr. Clemens Hunt.
Hi, Paul Clemens Hunt from the Blended Capital Group. Great panel. Rachel, it's a question for you. I'm going to dig a little bit into history. But given your leadership around the Equator Principles and the whole piles of banking things, if you go back to 1999, John Brown at BP gave the Stanford speech, and he broke the Global Climate Coalition, and he split the oil companies in the context of the UNFCCC negotiations. Rachel, it's my contention that there is not one banking leader at the moment, post-crash, with either the capability or credibility to take a step as brave as that. There's been some turbulence in the past 10 years in terms of BP, but why are we not seeing a banking leader of global significance who can break the pack and speak to the agenda that you have described today? Thank you.
Eric, do you want to speak to a UN or what you see as a political response on the need for politicians to hear industry to step up and essentially break these coalitions of the unwilling? And then Rachel?
Probably was very clear from what I said earlier today. I'm a great believer in leadership. I think leadership is really what is the driving issue on the planet, and basically what is the only raw material or only lacking resource on the planet is leadership. We have sufficient amount of money. We basically know what we need to do on most issues. The technical solutions are there. I mean, for sure, we need constantly to improve, very obviously. But it's leadership which is lacking. So the question which was put about where we can find the bank leadership is an appropriate one, but others are better to answer that than I am. But we need leadership in every area. I'm not so pessimistic as someone else here. I think we see a huge positive direction. If you compare Copenhagen climate talks in 2009, where I was present, with Paris last year, there was a huge, huge, huge difference. What was the difference? Mainly two items. There was a lot better political leadership in Paris compared to Copenhagen. The French led very well, but even more importantly than the French, the United States of America and China, the two main powers of the day, were able to come together. We just saw it when China and the United States, when Xi and Obama ratified the Paris Agreement. What happened? Everyone else was following in a nanosecond. Europe had difficulties, India had difficulties. There was a lot of pessimism out there, but when the two leaders ratified, everyone else within a few weeks ratified. Why was that? Because there was nowhere to hide. Where were the leaders who could hide somewhere? Where were the business people who could hide somewhere? When Obama and Xi had ratified. So that leadership on the political front is absolutely essential. But there was also, I believe, in Paris, a very different attitude by business compared to Copenhagen. Copenhagen, the main attitude was the following. Oh, it will be very, very painful with this climate transformation. And since it will be so painful, let me push the bill to someone else. Well, I'm the United States, it will be very painful for me, I push the bill to China. And I'm China, it will be painful for me, let me push the bill back to the United States. And we had this game going on, and hardly anything happened. Though not all businesses were there in Paris, but still a substantial part of business were there. There may be a lot of business opportunities out there. If I can take the lead in this transformation, or at least if I can be in the better part of that transformation, I may produce any number of green, decent jobs of the type which I will be very happy to tell my children about. I can come back in the evening, tell my children, and I know that all employees in my business will be able to come back after work and tell their children that we are proud of what we are doing. So let us be party to that transformation. So I agree with what Rachel said. We are on the right track. We are moving in the right direction. This is the first year where we invest more in solar, in wind, in all renewables than in fossil fuels. The issue is the speed. We are driving, the train is going in the right direction, but we need to speed up because the issues are urgent and need an immediate solution. But if we can mobilize the political leadership and the forces of business, we will get there.
Great. Okay, thank you, Eric. We're going to go to Hugh Whelan. Hugh?
Thanks, Eric. Hugh Whelan, Managing Editor of Responsible Investor Magazine. Question for Saka, really, and for the rest of the panel to some extent. Saka, your paper on responsible capitalism was excellently done, but it sort of at its heart, it almost had a little bit of frustration, because you put forward this interesting model of looking to the long term and looking after your beneficiaries' money, but the industry of finance itself is incredibly short-term, really, in the way that its business model is constructed. And I wondered if that tension between shorter-term business models and longer-term capitalism can actually be resolved. It's a bit of a big question, but it kind of sits at the heart of a lot of these discussions. If you can't genuinely change those business models,
so the heart of, I mean, thank you very much. And so the heart of the contention that we have is that the theory, the modern financial theory is wrong anyway, but because it actually makes you look at the wrong things. It just looks at one output, which is ROE, rather than all outputs, the effect on the environment, the effect on society, distribution of wealth, and so on. But leave that aside. The second contention is, to be short-term is wrong because you lose. There are so many studies that shows you that short-term decisions are wrong. So what we're doing is a two-pronged thing. On the one hand, we're pushing this long-termism, this holistic return idea, which you rightly alluded to. What we're saying to other businesses, our competitors, and what we're saying to our potential clients, and actually what we're saying to the companies that we invest in is, look, you can believe us or you can disbelieve us, but look at the effect of what we do. And if the effect of what we do is positive, then it must be reflecting that we're doing something right. I mentioned the three forces at the beginning. The reason that so many people are beginning to do ESG is not because they, well, all right, so everybody believes. I mean, I think everybody's born good, right? They want to do good. It's just suddenly they saw that maybe looking at ESG does make sense. But you're right, there's a lot of pressure on people to be 1 to 3 years. It's not just in business, it's actually in politics. Most politicians are so concerned with a 3 to 5 year cycle. So what is missing, I agree with Eric, is leadership. Now, if you accept that most people are not Dr. Evil, and if you accept that all that we need is leadership to push us in the right place, then we can get there. Our job in Hermes is to show it's workable and it's a better way of doing it than the old model, even by old matrices. And then we'll advocate for a change of theory. And that's kind of also what we do through the 300 Club, which has a lot of CIOs from a lot of asset owners from around the world. It's a long project, right? Does that answer? Half-half? It's frustrating, yeah, of course it is, but come on, no change is easy.
Gerald, do you want to follow?
But I think Eric, as well, you know, you can be terribly cynical about this and sort of be Keynesian and say, look, in the long term, we're all dead anyway. But you know, in our organization, any banking organization, we make a whole series of short-term choices on a daily basis. But what drives forward the behavior in an organization is very much the leadership at the top that creates the ability for firms to make the positive choices. But that's a cultural thing, and I think the difficulty we have in all of this is, I think it's to your point, that you know, some people are ticking the box, and they're still ticking the box, and you've got to have it authentic within a firm. Otherwise, the siren call of the short term will always pull you to the direction of the best return. Now, as I've said, we happen to sort of live in an organization as ING that sort of can ignore that siren call because, quite honestly, even given the size of ING, we can still make positive choices. There's plenty of things that we are asked to do every day across the world, some of them which would meet the sustainability standards and some that won't. And guess what? If we're given the choice and we've got capital which is limited, which is what all banks have, we make choices towards the more sustainable end of it. And I think that's where it's got to get to, is positive choices in the short term.
I just want to come back. The other thing that leadership should do is not be afraid of being a little bit almost willfully breaking molds, right? I mean, look, people who know me know that I don't believe in the bonus structures. But we're stuck. That's what the system has. So what do we have in Hermes? Tatiana works at Hermes, is a colleague of mine. She knows we pay half our bonuses for people to be nice. Right? I mean, you're smiling, right? Yeah. Seriously, half of the bonuses is for being nice. Changes culture. To be nice, it's actually long term. It's how do you treat your colleagues? How do you treat your clients? How do you treat the environment? How do you treat your neighbors? How much work do you do in the impoverished communities around you? That's being nice. And that then changes the mentality. Now, if we manage over the next 3 years to hold on to more expensive and skilled fund managers than our competitors, I bet you other houses in the city will start paying part of the bonus for behaviors, and they'll start talking about being nice. They'll look at how much money we're winning, and we are winning more money this year than people are losing money, and they're going to say, okay, it must be working, it must make sense. So you appeal to their greed, not to just their fear. As Eric said at the beginning, this is a shift from appealing to fear, risk, to appealing to greed. And the job of the leadership in this panel is to show actually it's better business. And then you get them to move. And society is pushing you anyway. I'll shut up now.
Okay, thank you. And unfortunately, we are running out of time. Unfortunately, we're going to have to settle up close up the session. I'm going to give the last word to Rachel in a moment to sum out in terms of responding also to the question you got. In terms of leadership, I think as Eric has raised out, leadership from the finance community definitely played a supporting role in achieving success in Paris. I don't think anyone can doubt the very important signaling that came from the finance community. I think some of the challenges put forward is within these organizations, financial organizations, some are very large, there's a lot of noise. And I guess the question is, do we get the long-term leadership we need within our organizations to actually deliver on these types of commitments that are being made externally? And what do they need in terms of signalings and in terms of management, in terms of incentives? Incentivize being nice. What does that mean exactly? How do we follow through? Rachel?
Well, thank you. I'm not Paul. It's nice to see you again. I'm not sure I would put quite as much emphasis on that speech as you do, but I think that it's true that the oil and gas industry has had a particular journey that it's had to go through, and is at a particular moment in time. Yes, I think I read that Rex Tillerson yesterday in London had said that climate change was actually a threat. But at the same time, I think Exxon filed suit against the Attorney Generals of Massachusetts and New York in their efforts to get Exxon to discuss. So, I think that one of the problems that we have is that leadership in different industrial sectors and in the financial sector is still hedging. Unfortunately, last year, there's nothing to hedge anymore because the agreement is whether we get there painfully, slowly, and expensively, or whether we get there smoothly, inclusively, reasonably, cheaply, and quickly, we're going in this direction. And so the question of leadership is, how do you be first mover and do well? How do you be second mover and do well? I think the other thing is that we all know, none of us who've got to prominence have got there without failure. And the true leadership that comes out of failure is that moment of really knowing who you are, because everything else gets stripped away and it's just you. And I don't know that happened to the banking industry in 2008. I'm not sure that the monstrous failure of the banking system in the financial crisis has really led to that kind of reflection. And that kind of and because I think if it did, then this enormous challenge of managing an economy as it decarbonizes and as it meets people's needs could be an extraordinary moment of leadership. So I'm hopeful, because we see leadership amongst regulators. Not everywhere, but we can all name those regulators that are really getting their head around this. We can name leaders at central bank level. We can name treasury secretaries and finance secretaries who really get this. And there's beginning to be a much different conversation. But I think the conversations have to come together. So if there's a conversation about what are we doing in a world where we've got reasonably static growth, where we have tax bases which are not sufficient to invest in the infrastructure, because the BT pension holder is not investing in the $90 trillion worth of infrastructure that has to be sustainable, that has to be built over the next 10 to 15 years. So we see points of light, but we've got a conversation going on over here about what's going on in the economy. We've got a conversation going on over here about the fact that the financial sector is not driving the kind of change we need. And then we've got a conversation over here about how on earth do we decarbonise. So I think the trick is for UNEP-FI and others to bring the leadership which is apparent in those three places into one conversation, because it is going to be one journey and it's going to be one assessment of opportunity. But I do think that I do think that there is leadership. I think there needs to be more of it. I think it needs to be more collective. I think we have to get beyond being able to quote, Hermes and ING and the Brazilian banks as leaders. It needs to be more of a norm. I think we're well on that way. But I do think that perhaps, is my last small bomb into the room, when the leadership as it is as undiverse as it is, it's very difficult to ask different questions and get different answers. And if we're going to continue to ask the same question of the same group of people within society for different answers, we might not be being the most efficient that we can be. So how you move what the leadership of the financial sector looks like, how you make it look a little bit more diverse, how you bring different perspectives in. Look at Donald at BT and IGCC bringing a completely different perspective in as a trustee of a major public pension fund. We need much more of that, much more diversity of viewpoint in the leadership of the sector. With that, I think the sector can drive things forward much more quickly. Thank you.
Thank you. Eric, thank you very much. Have you heard something that was going to change the political perspective, you think?
Yeah,
I think these three forces which I did set out initially and which I think everyone has basically in different ways spoken about is what's changed in the world. Citizens' engagement, leadership from the very top of society, basically meaning presidents and prime ministers and top political leaders, and the leadership from business. I mean, and there is fortunately no contradiction between the three. I mean, we are at the strongest when all three go together in the same direction, and we are at the weakest when we just get leadership for one of the three. And I'm fundamentally optimistic that we will be able to do that. Let me just at the end mention that the German presidency of the G20 has said that one of their main issues in their presidency will be financial disclosure, which will be to discuss voluntary system or regulatory systems for the financial sector to disclose not just the financial risk, but the climate and environmental risks of the portfolio. If that happens, and if that agenda is taken forward, I think it may have a major impact on markets.
Great. Okay, with that, thank you very much, Eric, Rachel, the full panel. Thank you, participants, for patience. We're going to go to the next session. We do actually, Eric started with a reference to Ant Financial. We were very happy, pleased to have Sun here, who's going to talk a little about that on a session on fintech with some others in the business, which is the next session in parallel with the session also on building resilience in cities. David?
We break now for coffee. If we can do this in 10 minutes, that would be excellent. As Eric says, we meet again for the two parallel sessions.